Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back. My name is, of course, Michael Granado. I am a history and philosophy educator. And today I'm going to kind of be responding to some videos that I've made recently on the American Civil War and identifying what I believe to be a common sort of historical fallacy that I see when people present certain types of historical narratives. Now, on my channel, I have made several videos about the American Civil War. I've been teaching history classes for quite some time now. And of course, when you teach American history, you got to talk about the American Civil War. So I've got some lectures about the Civil War. I've got some lectures about like the 13th Amendment, the antebellum period in the South. And I also like to do a lot of YouTube shorts based off of the city that I live in, Savannah, Georgia. Of course, played a crucial role in the American Revolution and the American Civil War. So I'd like to do little short videos kind of exploring local history. And this is on my mind because on a few of those videos, I've gotten some comments that kind of got me thinking about like identifying what I believe to be the root of this sort of historical fallacy. And so that's, of course, what I'm going to be talking about here today. But another thing that's happened recently that's gotten me thinking about this is a video that's come out. You may have seen it on YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get your news source from. This is from a conference that happened recently with Republican candidate Nikki Haley. She's going to be running for the Republican candidacy for president against Donald Trump this year. And she was asked at a conference what she believes to be the cause of the American Civil War, and this was her response.
I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
So Haley's response that the cause of the Civil War was how the government ought to be run, what people could or could not do. Now, she got a lot of flack for this, including from people like myself, because in her response, she doesn't mention, cover, or address what most historians would call and identify as the central cause or issue which started the Civil War, which was, of course, the American institution of slavery. Now, like I said, I've been teaching history for quite some time, and one of the kind of funny like anecdotes that I like to tell people about my experience teaching history is that I cover some pretty controversial topics. So, for example, in my history classes, I'll talk about like the first appearance of human beings in Africa and the migration of human beings across the globe. I'll talk about like the origins of various world religions, like the origins of Christianity, the rise of Islam. I'll also cover things like the advent of modern science. We'll talk about things like the Scopes trial and the conflict between Darwinian evolution and Christianity in America in the early 20th centuries. We talk about some pretty controversial topic. But the funny thing about teaching history, like when I talk about the origins of Christianity, yeah, like some people might be a little invested in that because they're religious. They might be like paying a little bit more attention and they might like ask some questions or give their own thoughts and opinions. But for the most part, if I talk about like the origins of human beings in Africa, people are like falling asleep. Or if we cover Descartes' meditations and I talk about the philosophical idea of global skepticism and how we can't be sure of anything that we know, even that we exist, people are like yawning. But the one thing without fail that I get pushback on and that students want to argue with me when I present information about it is, believe it or not, the American Civil War. Now, where I live undoubtedly plays a part in that. Again, I'm in Savannah, Georgia. I'm in the Deep South. So a lot of people come to the class with a lot of preconceived notions. And when I say, for example, that one of the major causes or the major cause of the American Civil War is slavery, I oftentimes get pushback on that because people want to argue that there were other causes and that there were other reasons. And on the one hand, they are correct. As I've said in other videos, history is an immensely complicated topic. And if you're looking at something as dense as the causes of the American Civil War, then yeah, we think we need to resist the urge to reduce everything to multiple choice style questions. And this is how we've been taught to think of history. So, for example, if I were to ask you what is the cause of World War I, you would say what? Most of you, if you remember middle school history, would say the assassination of the Archduke is what ignited the First World War. And you would, of course, be correct in that, but we would also want to talk about the fact that, but it's not just that, right? The roots of World War One go hundreds of years even prior to the assassination of the Archduke. So there's more than just that. And so an objection to the idea that slavery was the primary reason or cause of the Civil War is, well, yes, but there were other reasons. And this is where people tend to take it a little too far. This is, for example, some of the comments that I got under when I posted my short on TikTok about Nikki Haley and her response to this question. So one comment says he meant causes, but wants to keep it down to just one, and it was a small part, of course, referring to slavery, that slavery was a small part. And even then, it was only one of several causes. Somebody else just comes and flat out says, well, she's right about it, that the primary cause was governmental choice and the South wanting to make their own choices. After some clarification, they want to make their own choices about economics. Somebody else responded, this is my favorite. I always like when people tell me to go like learn history, or that I must not have studied history or something along those lines. If you think it was over slavery, then you need to learn history, right? And then under a recent video, on YouTube short that I posted, what's interesting about this is the short was about the first proclamation that was issued actually in Savannah, Georgia, that freed slaves. This was like a year prior to Lincoln's famous Emancipation Proclamation. And this person just wanted to point out what I think was kind of minimizing the role of slavery. I'm not sure why they wanted to point out under that video specifically, but right, the first sentence there, the North didn't fight the war to free slaves, but to preserve the Union. The idea that there was something else at stake, even in the terms of the North's reason for engaging in the Civil War, that it wasn't all about slavery. Now, I was thinking about these responses and I was trying to identify, kind of put my finger on what exactly, where's the mistake in reasoning? This is my philosopher brain thinking, like, where's the mistake in reasoning that's happening that I'm getting these sorts of responses? And what I'm think is happening here is the tendency when looking at a historical narrative to overemphasize one aspect of that narrative while under or de-emphasizing a different aspect of that narrative. And when I was thinking about this, an example, an alternative example besides the Civil War that came to mind was World War II, because that's another period of time that I'm interested in. And I think you could get like to kind of show you what's wrong with this by an absurd example, kind of a reductio ad absurdum, would be to consider, for example, if I were to ask you, who did the Nazis target during the Holocaust? Like, who were the primary targets of the ethnic cleansing that was happening in Germany throughout the 30s and 40s? Now, the simple answer to that would be to say, well, the Jewish people, of course, right? When you think of the Holocaust, you think of the Jewish people. But technically speaking, right, to be that guy at the party, technically speaking, there were other people, there were other groups of people who were targeted by the Nazis. So, for example, communist, other political parties different from the Nazi party, specifically communist, because of Germany being at war with Russia, communists were also targeted. But, other ethnic groups specifically were targeted. Specifically, the Roma people were targeted by the Nazis, as well as, of course, famously, homosexuals were targeted by the Nazis. So the fault that's happening here would be if you were listening to a lecture on the Holocaust and the person giving the lecture was talking about who the Nazis were targeting. And let's say, for example, that they only talked about the Nazis targeting communists. And they spent the entire time emphasizing the fact that communists were targeted during the Holocaust. Now, that's kind of absurd, of course, because numerically speaking, the primary target, the big group that we're dealing with, of course, is the targeting of the Jewish people. And that's the point that I'm trying to make here with slavery. You could talk about Southern states succeeding as a result of economic reasons, as a result of what they believe to be unjust taxes, as a result believing that they needed the right to secede from the Union, so sort of a constitutional type of issue. And technically speaking, yes, all that is true, but to emphasize those relatively minor parts over and against the big major elephant in the room seems to be pointing to some ulterior political motive that you're wanting to make, some larger political point, like why aren't we talking about slavery? And that, I think, is ultimately what I wanted to point out. The heart of the fallacy, the root cause, I think, is an overemphasis on certain aspects of the narrative over and against what would, without a doubt, be the main cause or the main issue. Anyway, I'm just going to keep this short and cut it off there. Feel free to argue with me in the comments section below if you want to argue about the Civil War. I mean, let's do it. Let's go for it. And, in general, just let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you all, and I'll see you all again next time.